Hello, everybody. This is Jenny. Hope everyone's having a great day. Tonight, our topic is all about metabolic dysfunction and the fact that you can actually reverse diabetes. Lynn and Mark are going to be walking us through that tonight. Before we jump in, I just want to give everyone a quick update to please be on the lookout for those of you that are Lyra clients. Please be on the lookout for in your email box by the end of this week. You will be getting an email from us. Everyone officially today received their PHP, which is so exciting. And we are going to be rolling out what we call a habit. Oh my God, I just was about to say habit breaker. What are we calling it, Lynn?
Tracker.
What is it?
Habit tracker.
Habit tracker. So the bottom line is the Lyra protocols can be as spectacular as possible. But if we don't marry it with proper support for you guys in helping you make the lifestyle changes you need in order to really empower and have these protocols work, we won't be able to move the needle on your health. So we are going to be rolling this out and helping support you all as now everyone has the PHP in their hands and really helping you across whether it's the nutrition, your diet, movement, sleep, or stress. And every one of you will be receiving a tailored plan specific to you just as a starting point. So again, please keep an eye out in your email, and those will be coming either tomorrow or Friday. Okay. All right. So tonight we do not have Alex. It's her birthday. Yesterday was her birthday. She's taken a few days off. So I am doing double duty. So I may not be as quick on the draw on the chats and the Q&A, but please make sure you guys reach out with any questions, and I'll try to make sure I'm keeping an eye on it. Okay. All right, Lynn, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jenny. All right. So tonight, as Jenny said, we're talking about the topic of diabetes and metabolic dysfunction.
Oh.
Slide, please. All right. So just to reorient us all where we are by now, it's so cool that I've talked to all of you because I feel like I know everyone so much better. And everyone has seen their own personal iceberg that we went over during your PHP appointments. And so we are continuing to go through this under the surface stuff, which is the root cause of why you have the symptoms you have. And we are now up to the topic of this blood sugar dysregulation. So that's what we're talking about tonight. And so we always start off by talking about how Lyra does things a little bit differently, or what's our theory behind why we do what we do. And how do we check your blood sugar? We don't just check your glucose. We check something called hemoglobin A1C. For one, it doesn't require that you fast when you do it. So it makes the blood draw a heck of a lot easier. But it also gives us a window into not just what your blood sugar is at one moment in time, but what the previous 3 months average looked like. So it's much more of an overview of how well controlled your blood sugar is over a longer period of time. It is one of the most commonly used tests to diagnose diabetes or prediabetes. And if you have high hemoglobin A1C, it could signify something called insulin resistance, which is what we're going to talk about next. Insulin resistance is really the hallmark of prediabetes and one of the precursors to it. So now we're all...
Sorry, Lynn. I have to, watching this and doing this dual role thing is not good.
No. Please pardon our technical difficulties. Okay, you can advance.
Thanks.
Thank you. No, back one.
Oh my God.
Okay, here we go. All right, so we're going to geek out on science a little bit. All you nerds out there, bear with me. I mean, I think this is fun. I think it's helpful to understand what happens in your body. Just having that knowledge is very empowering, and it makes it, I think, seem a little less, the more you understand it, the easier it is to take action. So this looks a little bit busy, but we're starting in the upper left-hand corner, which is your organ called your pancreas. Your pancreas has particular cells in it called the beta cells, and your beta cells release insulin. Okay. It releases insulin whenever it senses there's blood sugar in your system. So here comes insulin to the rescue. Insulin is those little round purple balls. And the little cubes, the little cube looking things, that's glucose. So insulin comes along because it sees glucose in your bloodstream. It's insulin's job to get that glucose out of your bloodstream. Having glucose in your bloodstream is not a good thing, causes a lot of inflammation. Where you actually need glucose is in your cells, in your muscles in particular, because that's what gives us energy. So insulin grabs onto glucose and escorts it into your muscle cells, and then your muscle cells use it for energy. That's what's supposed to happen. That's the normal process. That's the relationship between insulin and glucose. Next slide, please. So what happens when we have dysfunction is if you start at the top, you eat food, up goes your glucose, your pancreas is called into action and makes insulin. But what happens if it sees a lot of glucose over and over again, it becomes resistant. That insulin is no longer able to shove any more glucose inside the cells. And when that happens, your body is forced to do something with that sugar. And one of the things it does is it stores it as fat. It's just trying to help you out because it knows that it's not good to keep it floating around in your bloodstream. It can't get it into your cells, so it turns it into fat. Then you feel tired and hungry. And when you feel tired and hungry, you eat more food. And there's the vicious cycle of how this insulin resistance happens. Next slide, please. So if you go on with having insulin resistance untreated and left unchecked, you eventually can develop true diabetes. On the left-hand side, here's another representation of the normal process. The pancreas puts out insulin, insulin grabs onto glucose, it moves glucose into your cells. On the right-hand side, there is resistance. The insulin is no longer able to get glucose into the cells, and so you have more of that, those blue dots, which is glucose, staying in your bloodstream. Next slide, please. So when a doctor measures your fasting glucose, so why do we have you fast? Well, if you haven't eaten anything sugary or with carbs in it, there shouldn't be any glucose in your bloodstream. If we find elevated glucose in your bloodstream after fasting, you know there has to be that resistance that happened. Insulin couldn't get glucose into your cells. The glucose stayed floating around in your bloodstream. We measure it. If it's over 126, we diagnose you with diabetes. Or if your hemoglobin A1C is over 6.5, we diagnose you with diabetes. We say, oh my gosh, you have diabetes. How did this happen? When in actuality, this insulin resistance process probably been happening for months or even years before you get to that point. But in the regular medical model, we wait until you hit that magic 126 or above glucose or 6.5 in the hemoglobin A1C before we say, okay, now we need to do something. It's way too late at that point. It's a lot harder to reverse it than to prevent it in the first place. And that's why LYRA flags any hemoglobin A1C 5.7 or above. We say, wait a minute, 5.7 or above probably means you have insulin resistance. Even if your fasting glucose is fine, it doesn't matter. Hemoglobin A1C at 5.7 or above means this is early insulin resistance. We still have time to do something about it. This is the time to intervene and prevent the progression to actual type 2 diabetes. Slide, please. So just some stats on diabetes. There's about 37 million Americans that have diabetes. Just about all of them have what we just talked about, which is type 2 diabetes. There's other types. Type 1 diabetes is what's called insulin-dependent diabetes. That's actually an autoimmune condition. For those people, it's not a matter of insulin resistance. For those people, their pancreas does not produce insulin. It just doesn't. And so they're forced to have to take it. It's a completely different problem with a different solution. And then you might have heard of gestational diabetes. That's when pregnant women have problems with their blood sugar. It usually goes away, but having gestational diabetes does put you at risk for developing type 2 diabetes later. But the vast majority of people, of the 37 million Americans out there, have what we're talking about is type 2 diabetes. Why we care is because type 2 diabetes causes inflammation throughout your entire body, and it impacts many different organs, most profoundly your heart, your blood vessels, your kidneys, your eyes, your nerves. And if you have diabetes, you're twice as likely to have heart disease or stroke than someone who doesn't, and at a younger age. So it's really, really important to not get diabetes and to prevent this and to learn about it as soon as possible so that it doesn't progress. Slide, please. Okay. Oh, so there's also this concept of what's now being talked about as type 3 diabetes. Type 3 diabetes is insulin resistance in your brain. What we're finding is that new research is pointing to this notion that having insulin resistance, and particularly having these neurons in your brain become unresponsive to insulin, is a risk factor for dementia and Alzheimer's. And if you have a certain genotype called the ApoE4 gene variant, this is even more likely to happen to you. So the takeaway here is one of the strategies for preventing dementia and Alzheimer's is the same as, don't get diabetes as a way to lower your risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. So it's just fascinating research. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to now hand it over to Dr. Severi, who's going to be talking about the traditional way that we treat diabetes and then some more natural ways to treat it. And then he's going to hand it back over to me in a bit. So take it away, Dr. S.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. All right, let's jump in. Just to set us off on the right foot, so to speak, here is that, what Lynn's talking about the insulin resistance, it's basically pretty much everything we all care about as far as weight, how our blood sugar goes throughout the day, the fact that it causes that inflammatory response. And it's really just an amazing thing once you dive in and realize, how dangerous insulin is. Insulin itself, being more elevated in your body, has been linked to cancer, heart disease, pretty much everything. So trying to work on getting your insulin resistance down and how your cells utilize that insulin, like Lynn just talked about, is pretty much the key to longer life, healthier life, and all good things that are going to happen to your body. But here's the crazy part, is that pretty much every single medication out there for diabetes is really kind of bad for you. And it does not work on insulin resistance other than metformin. And the ones that maybe do work on insulin resistance, the risk is not worth the reward. So here's a list of all the basic common diabetes medications. And the only one that's really good for you is the first one, called metformin. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So next slide, Jenny. So obviously we're not going to go through this entire thing here, but this is just basically that list in all of the risk benefits in good and bad. But just to really show you that the metformin, as the first one, is the only one that's good for you. You can see that the second one on that list there, it does increase insulin sensitivity, which is obviously a good thing, but that drug has been linked to pancreatic cancer, bladder cancer, and it really causes a decent amount of weight gain, which is obviously very counterintuitive. So we don't use that drug anymore. And the next drug there, and then the last four, basically make more insulin. So isn't that really weird that, like, a lot of people think that diabetics all need more insulin, and that is literally the opposite. Insulin is bad for you. But as a doctor, any conventional doctor, they just want to see your hemoglobin A1C better, your glucose better. So they don't really care about that longer term thing. They still think they're doing a good thing for you by lowering your blood sugar, because I know it's counterintuitive, but if you have a diabetic that has insulin resistance, the idea is if you just give a boatload of insulin, you're just eventually going to shove that sugar and glucose into the cells. And that's obviously not what the body wants, and it's bad for you. So there's really no good diabetes medications other than that metformin. That's the point of this. And that's why changing your lifestyle, weight loss, and then we're going to offer some tricks today, or some smart things to do to try to help that insulin resistance. So next slide. You know, it would be weird to talk about insulin resistance, diabetes, blood sugar, and weight, and not talk about kind of the elephant in the room with these new drugs. Most people have probably at this point heard about what Ozempic is. There's 3 drugs on the market that are similar. It's Ozempic. They're all down that list: Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro. And I will admit they're exciting. I will admit they're working. And I will say that they do work on insulin resistance. So we're not against those drugs. We have seen results with these drugs. They are kind of exciting because of that. Um, they do work, but they don't work directly on insulin resistance. Basically, the way I explain how they work is that they trick the stomach into telling the brain that you're not hungry and satiated. So that makes your body go out of the insulin resistance mode. It decreases your appetite, you reduce your caloric intake, and it helps with insulin resistance. But, you know, you can see that even a new study was just released. It shows that it lowers the risk of heart attack and stroke by 20%, obviously because of the massive weight loss it's causing. But I do think that it's because it's helping that insulin resistance. The negative of the drug is that most insurances are not paying for the drug. It's very expensive. It does slow down your gut motility, causing some stomach problems and constipation. But here's why I really want to talk about this drug and make sure it's part of our slides today, is because the negative of the drug is that you could spend $700 a month, lose 10 pounds a month, 8 pounds a month, you know, something in that nature, and then within 4 months gain it all back. So if you don't have the rest of your life set, whether it's any part of the root cause of what Lear is trying to help you with, even if you did these drugs, you're going to gain all the weight back. So trying to put the hard work in and trying to find the root cause of your problem, trying to work on insulin resistance, trying to work on your habits, and trying to go like, it just sets you up for that success. And so we're not against these. It's just not what we want you to jump on right away until we fix the rest of the stuff going on in your body. Next slide. So what are the tricks naturally to help your blood sugar? So here's the list of the things that Lyra believes in and Lyra knows helps. We bolded here berberine because we're going to have a slide or two more about, or yeah, 2 more slides about berberine. But Lyra is going to recommend 2 different blood sugar support supplements. One is just berberine, which once again we're going to talk about, and the others are basically, the other one we're recommending has all this stuff in it. We're not going to talk about each of these things right now, but obviously some of these blood sugar support supplements are really cool because each of these supplements does something different for insulin resistance and how your body uses sugar. So there's a synergistic effect of when you put these together. I like always talking about inositol. Inositol is a good for you sugar, and it tricks your brain into thinking that it has sugar. So then you stop craving sugar, but it also works on that insulin resistance, almost like Wegovy, Ozempic does, by tricking your brain into saying that I don't need sugar anymore. Inositol is actually so powerful at helping insulin resistance that like Shady Grove Infertility uses it for infertile women who have PCOS, and it helps them get pregnant because sometimes women can't get pregnant because they have such bad insulin resistance. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about berberine, or a lot about berberine. We only really have 1 or 2 slides about berberine, but I'm going to kind of go off on hopefully a good tangent. But berberine is actually, and a lot of people might have heard about berberine recently because so many people want to get onto the Wegovy, Ozempic kind of bandwagon but they can't afford it. So they start researching and then they find berberine. Because basically berberine is one of the only real supplements that really does cause some weight loss to happen. Obviously I love berberine. Lyra loves berberine because it really does work on that insulin resistance. But it's actually, depending upon what company you use, it comes from different plants. It comes from the Oregon grape plant or the golden seal plant or the barberry plant. Berberine has been around for a very long time. It's been used for like 1,000 years in China for multiple ailments, but really for diarrhea. I always tell my patients this story. I actually have to say that this story might be a myth because I can't find the data on this story, but I tell the story anyway because I like how it explains why I love berberine so much. Is that the story or the myth goes that about 20 years ago there was these naturopaths in Canada, and they were doing these detox protocols where they would put people on a low carb, high protein diet, obviously removing all the sugar and carbs and all those things out of their diet. And then they will put them on a probiotic for their gut and berberine for their gut. And berberine is a well-known supplement that kills all the bad bugs in your gut. And maybe some of you guys have watched the GI lecture we had and talking about the testing we do and looking at all the bad bugs and the good bugs. Well, berberine is an absolute wonderful way of gently killing the bad bugs in your gut. And what happened in this myth or this story is that a few of the people that were doing these protocols lost a bunch of weight and got off of some of their diabetes medicines. And they went back and told the naturopaths that how great they were doing. And the naturopaths were like, duh, yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you cut out the carbs and cut out all this and do this. And then these people said, well, I didn't do that. I started taking the berberine and I felt so much better. I said, screw the diet. I'm not going to change my diet. And basically that exploded onto the scene, and a lot of people started talking about berberine, and there's been now hundreds of studies about berberine. Just to kind of wow you a little bit and kind of run through it, berberine has shown to cause on average a 5-pound weight loss. It show on average a 3.6% loss in body fat. It actually has multiple studies showing that it's equal to some of those diabetes drugs. It lowers blood sugar on average by 20%, lowers hemoglobin A1C, which we've talked about here, by 12%. It also has been shown to change every single cholesterol parameter for the better. So it lowers total, raises good, lowers triglyceride, and lowers LDL cholesterol. You're not going to find a drug that balances all of those things. It's been shown to decrease fatty liver. It has shown to have an antioxidant effect, shown to have an anti-inflammatory effect. It's actually been shown to kill cancer cells in the test tube. But really, I think it does, and then obviously this slide, it does all of these different things, with the insulin resistance, the glycolysis. But really, why it works and why it's so important is because of the next slide. Well, next slide, Jenny.
So Mark, quick question. Is there any negative to folks taking this if they don't have an elevated HbA1c?
A lot of integrative doctors use it just if someone has a gut problem. So you can use it just for a gut problem, and then secretly you're helping your insulin resistance. So no, anyone can take this. The side effects of berberine are really mostly gut related. So if it's a little bit hard on your gut, it can cause some diarrhea, mostly because it's killing off those things. It's obviously a relatively safe thing. There's been a lot of negative press about it recently because so many people are trying to take it at super high levels because they're trying to equal the Ozempic. But one of the reasons why I think it helps is this last thing here. It says increases the number of beneficial bacteria in your gut. I mean, I think it's doing something really magical in the intestinal lining. And obviously, like we talked about how important the gut is and your microbiome is, that it changes things for the better there, increasing how your body processes foods and works on insulin. But really, last slide, or for my last slide here, Jenny, is that when Lynn was talking earlier about understanding the science behind it, about certain things that helps. Well, it's just very amazing because berberine absolutely works on this AMPK enzyme, which is that little, square in the middle there, this enzyme. And at the top here, I wrote that the 3 things that activate this enzyme are metformin, which is one of the diabetes drugs, exercise, and berberine. But really, just to talk about this enzyme real quick, this enzyme is the energy sensor of your brain and of your cells. It's also like the metabolic switchboard. So really, everything you do good for your body turns on this enzyme. And this enzyme turns on metabolism. And it makes all of these things like fatty acid synthesis, fatty acid catabolism, protein synthesis, all of these things, it turns it all on. And why And why it's such a perfect thing to talk about is because every single thing you do bad for your body makes this enzyme get sleepy. So like the more that you exercise, the more that this enzyme's turned on, the more weight you're going to lose and whatnot, which obviously is an obvious thing. But the things that actually also activate this enzyme are fasting. And that's why this big craze about intermittent fasting is happening, is because if you intermittent fast and you don't eat that breakfast, you actually turn on this enzyme. And so for 4 or 5 hours a day, maybe even a little bit more, you go into this mode where your body's utilizing and cleaning house and doing all these wonderful things. Also, doing cold temperatures. So you probably have heard about like cryotherapy and cold plunges. Well, when you change the body temperature like that, you turn on this enzyme. Some antioxidant foods turn on this enzyme. Fresh vegetables, berries, grapes, nuts, green tea, these things also turn on this enzyme. But the secret is berberine literally works by directly turning on this enzyme. And that's why I wanted to spend time talking about berberine, not just because of hey, it can help you, but also because it really is working on that direct insulin resistance, which Lynn's talking about. We'll talk about that insulin resistance. That's it for me. All right, Lynn.
All right, I'm back. I'm back to yet again talk about the elephant in the room. It's always left to me. You can't supplement your way out of diet and lifestyle choices. So here we are again, back to talking about the foundations of what we eat and how powerful this can be and how this is your medicine. You know, diet choices are the best medicine, the best supplement you can ever take. So I'm going to kind of break it down into 4 different ways, like what you can eat, what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat, when you eat it, and then also when and how you move your body. And each one of these can be a very powerful way to reverse insulin resistance as well. So next slide again. All right. What can you eat to help your body become more healthy in a metabolic way? So foods that are high in fiber, and some of this you may have heard before, but fiber is your friend. Fiber helps slow down how fast glucose gets absorbed in your body. A rough rule of thumb for fiber is to aim for about 30 grams a day. Most of us don't get enough. The best sources of that are vegetables. Also, nuts and seeds are other good sources. Protein, same thing. Protein helps slow down how fast glucose is absorbed in your body. Grass-fed beef, organic poultry, lentils, eggs, bone broth are good sources of protein. Fats, same basic principle that can help balance your blood sugar levels. And fats can also serve as a source of fuel. You might have heard of the keto diet, which is pretty extreme. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that today, but keto diets involve eating hardly any carbs at all. And then fats serve as your source of fuel during that. Sources of good fats, MCTs, coconut oil, avocados, nuts. Foods that contain chromium. Chromium helps improve your glucose tolerance and helps your balance your blood sugar levels. Broccoli, brewer's yeast, and grass-fed beef are sources of chromium. And then magnesium. A lot of diabetics are actually deficient in magnesium. Magnesium can be a great supplement for a lot of us for a lot of reasons, but also if you're diabetic. Spinach, chard, pumpkin seeds, and almonds are good sources of magnesium. So that's things that you can eat. Things that you shouldn't eat. Again, some of this may seem pretty obvious, but sugar, refined sugar, actual added sugars. And one of the biggest culprits of this is sweetened beverages. It's one of the reasons why we asked you that on the assessment questions. Just came out with a study that showed that Dr. Severi sent me this, but postmenopausal women who have a higher intake of sweetened beverages have a high risk of liver cancer. So we know that sweetened beverages in a big way are a huge culprit behind blood sugar spikes. And switching to something like maple syrup or honey is only a little bit better. They're still going to increase your blood sugar, not quite as big a spike. And there's no difference between organic sugar and regular sugar. Sugar is sugar. There really is no safe source of it. Stevia is an alternative that can be used in small amounts. It doesn't have as big a blood sugar effect as actual sugar. So grains and white starchy carbs like rice, potatoes, corn, wheat, flours, these get broken down very quickly into glucose within minutes of consuming them. Alcohol actually spikes your blood sugar, especially when you don't have food with it. So if you're just having your alcoholic beverage in the evening, you're sitting down and having a cocktail, you're not eating anything with it, it will spike your blood sugar. And there's a 43% increased risk of diabetes associated with heavy alcohol consumption, which is considered 3 drinks a day or more. Processed foods. One of the reasons we told you to eliminate processed foods during our detox is because of this. We wanted to help, give you a better chance of balancing your blood sugar during those 5 days. The more refined and processed a food is, the more impact it's going to have on your blood sugar. And then I want to spend a few minutes talking a little bit about this concept of the glycemic index. Foods with a high glycemic index should be avoided. What do I mean by that? Foods that will raise your blood sugar quickly have a higher glycemic index. Next slide, please. So this is a visual way to look at it. So you eat a food and your blood sugar shoots up very quickly. Those are the foods that are considered high glycemic index foods. Versus foods that are lower in glycemic index, you get a much blunter increase in your glucose curve. So just intuitively, you would think, okay, that's probably easier for my pancreas to handle it if I don't give it such a huge spike. If I'm just giving it a little bit throughout the day, my pancreas will be like, this is no problem, I can handle this. And your cells will be like, that's cool, I got room for more, come on in. So it just makes it so much easier for your body to handle what sugar you're giving it when you feed it lower glycemic index foods. Next slide, please. So this slide looks a little busy, but basically, it's another way of saying what I just said. If you have a big glucose spike, you're going to get a big drop. So when you get the wide swings of being on this blood sugar roller coaster all day, a few things are going to happen. You're going to get more insulin output. And then when it goes down, you're going to have cravings. You're going to want what? You're going to want sugar and carbs because your brain says, oh my God, my blood sugar is too low, I need to get it up. So you're going to crave carbs, you're going to crave sugar. It usually happens to us in the afternoon, right? So the way to avoid that is to never go out of that zone where you're just kind of cruising along that dotted line in the middle, a little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit up, a little bit down. That's in that healthy zone. And by the way, anytime your blood sugar is too high or too low, you're going to store fat. This is a big deal. Remember, your body's smart. It's always trying to help you out. If it senses that there's too much glucose floating around, it knows it's bad. It's going to say, I got you. I'm going to turn it into fat for you. Isn't that awesome? We would rather it not do that, but it's actually trying to help you by getting that glucose out of your bloodstream. So it's saying, let's turn it into fat. And where it puts it matters. Next slide, please. This is what I call the insulin meter. So I can look at my patients and tell whether they have insulin resistance. If you carry your weight around the middle, sometimes we refer to this as the apple shape. This is what happens when you have insulin resistance. Again, your body's trying to get that blood sugar out of your bloodstream. It turns it into fat. It stores it in the middle. That's a problem. That's really dangerous fat, I guess you can say. This is why people get what's called fatty liver, which is that fat that infiltrates your liver. When you store fat around the midsection, that's one thing that can happen. And this is a telltale sign of insulin resistance, just by seeing where someone carries the fat. And this is why insulin resistance is linked to weight gain. This is why people that have insulin resistance can't lose weight if they don't fix this problem first. You can bang your head against the wall all day long trying to lose weight. If you don't fix insulin resistance, you are working against Mother Nature. You're working against your body's ingrained survival mechanisms. If you don't fix this problem, you're not going to be able to lose weight. That's why semaglutide and Ozempic work, because they are working on, that's why metformin works, that's why berberine works. This side effect of weight loss is because it's fixing insulin resistance. Next slide, please. So here's a quick list of some foods that are higher on the glycemic index. Basically anything white bread, white potatoes, white rice, watermelon. There's some very high glycemic fruits. Watermelon is one, honeydew, cantaloupe, grapes are pretty high glycemic index. Really ripe bananas, the bananas that have those brown spots on them, they're very sugary. Instant oatmeal, cereals, these are the foods that are going to shoot your blood sugar up really quickly. Remember, that's never where we want to be. Medium glycemic index foods, brown rice. It's a little bit better. It's got some minerals in it. It's still medium, so it's not great to have a lot of it, but it's better than white rice. Popcorn. How many of us love our popcorn? It's low fat, right? I used to eat popcorn all the time when I was in the low fat craze. It's a great low fat snack, but it's very high glycemic index. Pineapple, French fries, even sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are better than white potatoes, but still medium. And bananas that are not quite as ripe are better than the really ripe ones, but still medium. Next slide, please. Examples of some lower glycemic index foods: apples, kidney beans, chickpeas, lentils, citrus fruits, much better. Dairy, believe it or not, green leafy vegetables. Why? Pretty much any food that's got a lot of fiber and healthy fats are going to be lower glycemic index. Anytime you have a food with fiber or fat or even some protein, it will blunt that glycemic response. So instead of shooting straight up, you're going to get that nice blunt up and down that you want. You're not going to get the straight up and down. You're going to be cruising in that optimal zone, that fat burning zone, not that fat storage zone when you're too high or too low. Next slide, please. So how do you know which foods are impacting you the most? Because yeah, we can look at all these charts and we can follow all these charts, but everybody's different. And here's a tool that I use with my patients that I think is very helpful. It's called a continuous glucose monitor, a CGM. You can see it on the back of her arm there. It's something you stick on your arm, you wear it for 14 days, and she's got her little app on her phone. And basically you hold it next to the glucose monitor and it tells you in that moment what your blood sugar is. Hers is 106. And so the reason it's so cool is it's continuous. It can tell you at any moment, on any day, for 14 days, what your blood sugar is. And that can be very helpful to help you figure out which foods may be spiking your blood sugar. I have a lot of people who I work with who say to me, I don't know what I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I have no idea why I have high hemoglobin A1C. I thought I was doing everything right. I eat really healthy. How can I figure this out? So that's why I have them do it. Could be something really innocent that they had no idea they were doing. Because we're not taught this, right? We're taught that, and there's some good things about this, but we're taught, fruit's better than a candy bar, and it is. But not if you're sitting down and having a bowl of watermelon and honeydew at 8 o'clock at night with your glass of wine. So maybe that fruit or that popcorn really isn't that good a thing for you anyway. Maybe that bowl of instant Quaker oatmeal that you've been having for breakfast because somebody told you that oatmeal helps you lower your cholesterol, maybe that's not a good thing for your blood sugar. Maybe you're going too long without eating and you're having blood sugar drops. So the point is measuring what you're doing for 14 days can be extremely helpful for figuring out your habits in real time and making adjustments. Maybe you can have your normal breakfast for 3 days in a row, and then the next 3 days, try a veggie omelet and see if there's any difference in your blood sugar, both at that moment and throughout the rest of the day. So it's a very useful tool. We use it all the time. And I think we're going to be talking to you guys about offering it to you as well, if you're one of those people that have high hemoglobin A1C. Next slide, please. Okay. Last thing, two more things. When you eat matters. We asked you this on your assessment. Do you eat within 2 hours of bedtime? Why do we ask you that? Because If you eat within 2 hours of bedtime, what are you doing after that? You're going to bed. So what happens when you put blood sugar into your system and you don't use it? You go to sleep. Well, it's probably going to stay circulating in your system, or your body's going to store it as fat, and your sleep's probably going to be disturbed. Because if your blood sugar goes up right before bed, guess what's going to happen in the middle of the night? It's going to crash. And when your blood sugar crashes in the middle of the night, you will wake up. So blood sugar fluctuations will disturb your sleep, and it's not doing you any favors to eat that close to bedtime, because there's nothing for your body to do other than keep it circulating or convert it to fat. The other thing with timing is eating carbs by themselves. Again, we talked about having a lot of fruit all at once, or having that big bowl of oatmeal. That there's nothing to cut that glycemic response. You're just going to get a big spike. So it's a much better idea to combine carbs with fibers, proteins, or healthy fats. For instance, have a little bit of fruit with a handful of nuts. You have that protein and the fiber from the nuts, you're not going to get the glycemic response from the fruit. Have some steel cut oats in the morning, not a pack of instant Quaker oatmeal. Steel cut oats has more fiber right off the bat, and add a little nuts and seeds to it. So immediately you're not going to have the glycemic response from that oatmeal. So food combining is a really useful tool. And then lastly, going a long time without eating. Now, I know Dr. Severi just talked about the benefits of intermittent fasting for certain health reasons, and that's true. But if you're diabetic, pre-diabetic, or have insulin resistance, just knowing that tells me that you are going to could potentially be having some of those blood sugar ups and downs. And going a long time without eating, you're definitely going to have more ups and downs. We want to get you off that blood sugar roller coaster. So sometimes we need to have you eat smaller meals throughout the day so you can stay in that zone. So you're never going too high or too low. Slide, please. And lastly, when and how to move your body. So exercise is one of the best things that you can do to help lower your blood glucose levels. Why? Because you're using the sugar, right? So remember, back to the slide in the very beginning, insulin's job is to get glucose out of your bloodstream into your cells, because your muscle cells need to use it for energy. So if you use it, it creates more space for more, which is what you want, right? To reverse insulin resistance, you need more space in your cells so that insulin can keep doing its job. So just a 10-minute walk after you eat has been shown to lower glucose levels. This is a great strategy, especially this time of year when we can go outside. A 10-minute walk after your lunch, a 10-minute walk after your dinner. It doesn't take much. So whatever you take in during that meal, you're immediately going to use, which is awesome. You're never going to get your system too clogged up. There's always going to be space for more. Interval training, high intensity interval training, which is where you get those quick bursts of output, can burn 3 to 5 times more body fat than traditional cardio and help keep your blood glucose levels stable. And then strength training, using building muscle mass with weights, weight-bearing exercise 2 to 3 times a week is also a great strategy. These types of exercise need glucose. You need glucose to strength train. You need glucose for high intensity interval training. So these are great strategies, again, for using up that sugar, creating space for more. Slide, please. So the big takeaways. So type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance cause inflammation in your body, impacts many organs and body systems, and increases your risk of heart disease, stroke, dementia, and obesity. These conditions are associated with diet and lifestyle habits, which is the good news. That's good news, because that means they're preventable and treatable, often without needing medications. It's all about habit change. Sometimes we need medications, but sometimes supplements like berberine can be just as good and don't have the side effects associated with those traditional meds. Continuous glucose monitors are an awesome tool for figuring out which foods are directly impacting your blood sugar, because everybody's different. And some strategies to keep your blood sugar stable in that healthy fat burning zone are choosing foods that are low glycemic index, not eating too close to bedtime, combining carbs with foods high in fiber, healthy fats, and proteins, not going too long in between meals, taking short walks after you eat, and incorporating HIIT and strength training into your regimen. All right, so that's it. Jenny, do you have any
Yeah.
closing questions or closing comments?
Well, we had just two quick questions. As far as just a quick question about actually one of the supplements that we're not covering here, you covered in another one. What's the best time of day to take ashwagandha?
So ashwagandha, I generally tell people to take it at bedtime. Ashwagandha is one of those strategies. Well, remember, it does a lot of good things for us, but it specifically can help calm the system. It helps calm the autonomic nervous system. It can help lower cortisol. So that's usually a good bedtime strategy. That being said, I've had people use it during the day too, but I generally recommend starting out at bedtime.
Okay, excellent. And the other is just really more specific to her. Just I don't think there's an actual question there. If I'm wrong, Cheryl, please reach out. Any other questions at all, everyone? All right, excellent. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great evening.